The letter sat on my kitchen table for 2 days before I opened it. Not because I hadn't seen it, but because I'd learned over the years that letters from government offices rarely bring good news. When I finally tore the seal and unfolded the paper inside, my hands went cold. Not from panic. From recognition. Notice from the property registry. Request for correction of ownership record. Urgent appointment scheduled. I read the paragraph once, then again, then a third time, not searching for clarity, but searching for the mistake. That would explain everything away. There wasn't one. The request hadn't been filed by me. And the house mentioned in the letter wasn't just any property. It was my house. Not impressive, not luxurious. A modest single-family home on the edge of town. Solid, quiet mine. The house I had worked for, saved for, signed for. Lived in alone for years, while my parents watched from a distance. Neither helping nor approving, but always waiting. Because they had never liked this house. They had only tolerated it, as long as they believed it would eventually belong to the family. The morning of the appointment, the sky was heavy and gray. Outside the registry building, people stood with folders tucked under their arms and paper coffee cups in their hands. Everything looked ordinary. Proper shoes, tired faces, the familiar mix of urgency and resignation you only see around government offices. Inside, the security check beeped softly. Trays clinked, shoes scuffed against tile. Routine. The hallway, leading to the property registry, smelled like paper, old heating systems, and that particular sterile cleanliness that exists only in administrative buildings. I arrived a few minutes early. My parents were already there. They sat on the bench directly, across from the office door, as if they'd rehearsed the scene. My father's arms were crossed tightly over his chest. My mother held a folder on her lap, gripping it as though it contained a verdict. And next to them sat a man in a tailored suit. Calm, groomed, the kind of posture that says the outcome is already decided. Their lawyer. When my mother saw me, she lifted her chin slightly. Not aggressively. More like she wanted me to know she didn't owe me an explanation. "You came," she said quietly. "I received a notice," I replied. My voice was steady. The lawyer glanced at me briefly, then looked away, as if I weren't the person this was about, but an obstacle in the way of something inevitable. The door opened. The clerk called my name, the same name that appeared on every official document tied to that house. I stood and walked in. My parents followed. The lawyer entered last, leaving just enough space between us to signal his importance. The office was plain desk, computer, stacks of files, shelves lined with binders. The man behind the desk wasn't friendly, but he wasn't hostile either. Alert, precise, unimpressed. He gestured toward the chairs without smiling. "Good morning," he said. "This concerns a request related to the property on Linden Street." My father nodded immediately. "Yes," he said. My mother didn't wait for me to speak. "The house belongs to the family," she said calmly. "My daughter was only managing it." I kept my eyes forward. I said nothing. I wanted to hear how far they were willing to go if no one stopped them. The clerk glanced at his screen, then at the folder the lawyer placed confidently on the desk. "You're representing the parents?" he asked. "I am," the lawyer said. "All documentation is complete." He slid the folder forward as if handing over something already approved. "We're requesting a correction of the ownership record," the lawyer continued. "The daughter's name should be removed and the property registered in accordance with the family's ownership arrangement." My mother nodded, as if it were a minor administrative detail, something that could be resolved today so everything could finally be at peace. The clerk looked at her briefly. "Changes to property records don't happen by preference," he said. "They happen by formal requirements." My father's eyebrows tightened. "We have everything required." "We'll see," the clerk replied evenly. He opened the folder, flipped the first page, then another. His expression stayed neutral, but his movements slowed when he reached a specific document. I recognized the handwriting instantly. I hadn't seen it in years. I'd learned to avoid it. My mother's below it, printed neatly, was my name. The clerk didn't look at me yet. "Miss Turner," he said calmly, "do you recognize this document?" I leaned forward slightly. "No," I said. "That isn't mine." My mother let out a quick, sharp laugh. Of course she'd say that. The lawyer remained composed. "It's a power of attorney and a consent declaration," he said. "It's a piece of paper," I said quietly. "And that signature isn't mine." The clerk raised his eyes. Now he looked at me, not skeptically but carefully. Then he turned back to the computer. "I'm pulling up the registry record," he said. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. The room fell silent. My parents sat perfectly still, as if they were already celebrating. Then the clerk stopped typing. His hand froze on the mouse, his eyes fixed on the screen like he was looking at something that shouldn't be there. The computer didn't just pause. The entire room seemed to stop with it. My mother leaned forward slightly. "There," she whispered. "You see?" The clerk slowly stood up. He didn't speak right away. When he finally did, his voice was calm, so calm it sounded dangerous. "The property," he said quietly, "has just been locked." For a moment, no one reacted. Word locked hung in the air like it hadn't fully landed yet. My mother blinked rapidly, as if rearranging the sentence in her head. "Excuse me," she asked, her voice still polite, still controlled. The clerk remained standing. He didn't sit back down. He kept his eyes on the screen, as if making sure whatever he'd seen wouldn't disappear if he looked away. "There is an active lock on the property record," he said. "That means no changes can be made, today, tomorrow, or until the lock is lifted." My father let out a short, sharp laugh, the sound he always made when something didn't go according to plan. "That's ridiculous," he said. "Who would lock it?" The lawyer raised a hand, attempting calm. "There must be a mistake," he said politely. "We've submitted a valid request with supporting documentation. A lock like this doesn't just—" "It does," the clerk interrupted without raising his voice. "And it just did." My mother leaned forward. "Just now?" she asked. The clerk clicked once, read silently, then nodded. "Time-stamped minutes ago. Digitally submitted." My father's face drained slightly. Not enough to be dramatic, but enough to notice. A brief loss of color before he pulled himself. "Back together." "That can't be right," my mother said quickly. "We're the parents. We're just trying to handle this internally, as a family." The clerk finally looked at her. "Internally isn't a legal term," he said. "And the property registry isn't a family archive." The lawyer pulled the folder closer, flipping through pages faster now, searching for something that could restore control. "Then we request to see the basis for this lock," he said. "Who initiated it?" The clerk didn't answer immediately. He typed, again, "Read." His expression remained neutral, but something in his posture shifted, subtle, professional. The posture of someone who realizes they're no longer just processing paperwork. "I can't disclose internal details," he said finally, "but I can tell you what it means." He placed his hand flat on the folder, directly over the page with the questionable signature. There is an indication of a serious concern related to this property. Until that concern is clarified, the ownership record is protected. My mother stared at his hand. "Concern," she repeated. "What kind of concern?" "For example," the clerk said evenly, "that documents submitted here may be of uncertain origin or authenticity." The lawyer lifted his head sharply. "That's an allegation." "No," the clerk replied. It's a possible explanation for why a lock is issued, and in this case, it's a likely one. My mother's eyes widened. That document is real. I spoke before thinking about it. It isn't, I said calmly, and I already said so. The room went quiet again. The clerk looked at me longer this time. Miss Turner, he said, I need to ask you directly. Have you taken steps to secure the property record? My mother flinched at the word secure. What does that even mean? She demanded. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I felt the shift happening. The focus was no longer on whether my parents would get what they wanted. It was on who had prepared first. The lawyer attempted to intervene. My client, I asked Miss Turner, the clerk said. I nodded slowly. I sought advice, I said. I wanted to make sure no changes could be made without my knowledge. That was true, without saying everything. Weeks earlier, I had accepted something. That felt obvious in hindsight. If my parents were going to do something quietly, they wouldn't warn me. They would just try. My mother inhaled sharply. You set a trap, she whispered. No, I replied. I protected my property. The clerk lifted an eyebrow, barely noticeable. All right, he said. Then today's situation is clear. He didn't close the lawyer's folder. He left it open exactly as it was, like a snapshot. What happens now? My father asked. His voice wasn't confident anymore. The clerk turned back to his screen. I will document today's request, he said, including the submitted documents and the fact that the registered owner disputes their authenticity. My mother's voice dropped. Documented how? The clerk stood and reached for a thick binder from the shelf, older, heavier than the lawyer's folder. An official one. I will record this attempt, he said, and I will retain copies of what was presented. My father stood abruptly. You're taking our documents? I'm making copies, the clerk corrected, and recording who requested the change. The lawyer cleared his throat. So our request remains pending? Your request exists, the clerk said, but it doesn't move anything. It becomes part of a review. My mother's fingers tightened around her bag. What kind of review? The clerk looked at her. The kind that doesn't involve family discussions. Then, he added, almost casually, and while this review is ongoing, any further attempts to alter the record will be noted. He paused. Traced. That was when my mother stopped speaking entirely. The clerk turned back to me. Miss Turner, I'll need your identification. For the record, I handed it over. He examined it briefly, nodded, and typed. Then he looked at my parents. And I'll need both of yours as well. My father swallowed. For what? So there's no confusion, the clerk said calmly, about who attempted to remove an ownership entry today. For the first time, I understood what the lock really meant. It wasn't just protection. It was a trail. And suddenly the hallway outside, the people waiting, the benches, the quiet murmurs, no longer felt like background. It felt like witnesses. My parents handed over their IDs reluctantly, not dramatically, not angrily. Reluctance was worse. It meant they understood what was happening, even if they didn't want to accept it. The clerk compared the documents carefully, typed several entries, then began writing on a blank sheet of paper. He didn't rush. He didn't look up. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a record. I am noting, he said without lifting his eyes, that both individuals present today requested the removal of the registered owner and submitted a power of attorney and consent declaration, the authenticity of which the owner disputes. My mother swallowed. That makes it sound like I'm noting what occurred, the clerk said calmly. Not how it feels. The lawyer adjusted his tie. "We formally object to any implication of wrongdoing," he said. "There is no proof of forgery." "I didn't say there was proof," the clerk replied. "I said there is a lock." He stamped the page once. The sound was dry. Final. Then he clicked on the computer again. This time the screen didn't freeze. It loaded something new. His eyes moved across the lines, slowly, deliberately. "Here," he murmured, not to us, but to himself. My mother lifted her head instantly. "What is it?" she asked. The clerk reached for the phone on his desk. "An internal confirmation," he said. "Please remain seated." The tone wasn't a request. He dialed a number, spoke his name, referenced a file code. Then he stopped talking. We could only hear fragments. "Lock entry confirmed. Yes. Submitted digitally. Supporting concern noted." My father shifted in his chair, restless. The lawyer placed a hand on his arm, not comforting, but restraining. The clerk hung up. "The lock wasn't placed randomly," he said, "and it isn't temporary." My mother tried to smile. "So what does that mean?" she asked. The clerk opened the folder to the page with the signature again. He didn't point to it. He simply let his gaze rest. "There. It means," he said, "that there is reason to believe an attempt may already have been made to influence this ownership record improperly." The lawyer's voice sharpened. "We submitted our request today." "No," the clerk said. The single word landed heavier than anything else he'd said. My father stared at him. "What do you mean, no?" "There is a documented inquiry from last week," the clerk said. "Similar purpose, similar framing." My mother went completely still. "And there is a note," he continued, indicating that the registered owner explicitly denied consent. The lawyer inhaled sharply. "If that's the case," he said carefully, "then the source of that earlier inquiry must be identified." "That's exactly what will happen," the clerk replied. He pressed a key and rotated the monitor slightly. Not enough for us to read, but enough to show that it existed. "This file now contains multiple data points," he said, "which means it can't be handled informally." My mother's voice dropped to a whisper. "Handled how?" Then the clerk leaned back slightly. "It becomes a matter of verification," he said. Outside this office, he stood, retrieved the documents from the copier, and placed the copies into a thick, worn folder, one that looked older than all of us. An official folder, the kind that didn't get emptied quickly. "These copies stay," he said. "The originals may leave." My father raised his voice. "This is outrageous." "This is procedure," the clerk replied. "And what happens to those copies?" my mother asked. "They become part of a review," he said. "If it's determined that documents were falsified or misused, that review may extend beyond property records." "Beyond?" my father repeated. The clerk met his eyes. "You know what that means." The lawyer cleared his throat, less confidently this time. "We request formal access to the basis of the lock." "You may submit that request," the clerk said. "You will receive a response through proper channels." He picked up another stamp, pressed it onto the lawyer's application, then wrote a single word beneath it: "Locked." My father stared at it as if he were watching a door close. My mother turned to me. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice unsteady. "Why are you tearing the family apart?" I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice. "I'm not doing anything," I said. "You tried to take something that wasn't yours." The clerk stood and opened the door. "This appointment is concluded," he said. "You will be notified in writing. Until then, I advise against further attempts to influence the record." The lawyer gathered the originals quickly. My mother clutched her bag. My father lingered. At the doorway, "This isn't over," he said quietly. The clerk didn't look at him. "The property remains locked," he said. "That's not an opinion. That's a status. Outside in the hallway, the noise felt louder footsteps, papers, coughs. My parents walked behind me. Now, not beside me. At the exit, the lawyer stopped abruptly. He checked his phone and answered it immediately. "Yes," he said softly. "This is Keller." A pause. His expression changed. Not panic, but something close to recognition. "I understand," he said. "No, that wasn't disclosed to me." Another pause. "Yes, I'll address it." He hung up. My mother grabbed his sleeve. "What was that?" He hesitated, just long enough to be noticed. "There is already a file number," he said quietly. "And the lock isn't internal." My father stared at him. "What do you mean?" "It means," the lawyer said, lowering his voice, "that whatever started this didn't start today." And in that moment, I realized something my parents were only just beginning to understand. They hadn't been stopped. They had been caught in motion. Outside, the air was cold and damp. A light drizzle coated the old pavement. The kind that doesn't look serious, but soaks through everything if you stand still long enough. My parents stood near the entrance, suddenly unsure of where to go next. Not because they didn't have options, but because none of them were under their control anymore. The lawyer spoke first. "We should leave," he said, "and wait for the written notice." "Wait?" My mother snapped. "You said this would be handled today." "I said we would file a request," he replied, keeping his voice low. "I didn't say it would be executed." My father stepped closer to him. "You didn't mention any prior file," he said. "Or a lock." "I wasn't aware of it," the lawyer answered. "And that's the problem." He glanced around. People were walking past us, not listening closely, but close enough. Witnesses. Again. My father noticed it too. His shoulders tightened. I didn't stay. I walked past them and headed down the street. 2 blocks away was the small law office I had visited weeks earlier. The first place where I had said out loud what I had tried to ignore for years. "I think they're really going to try." My lawyer was there. He didn't look surprised when I walked in. "You were at the registry?" he said before I sat down. "Yes, and it's locked." He nodded once and reached for a folder on the shelf. My folder. It was thicker now. "Good," he said. "Then it worked." I stared at him. What exactly worked? He slid a single page across the desk, plain, official, dated, property record locked, pending review. "We requested the lock days ago," he said, with a formal notice of concern that documents might be misused. "And that was enough?" I asked. "It doesn't take certainty," he replied. "It takes plausibility. And you had that." He continued calmly. "You told me there was a document you hadn't signed. You described the pressure. We provided a signature comparison." "That's enough for the registry to act." My stomach tightened. "What happens now?" "The documents your parents submitted today become part of the file," he said. "If any of them are falsified, this stops being a family issue and becomes—" "What?" "A matter handled by people who don't care about family dynamics." He leaned back. "That's the point." My phone vibrated on the desk. A message from my mother. "Call me. Now." I didn't respond. A second vibration, a voice message this time. I didn't open it. "They'll escalate emotionally," my lawyer said, watching me. "They'll try guilt, fear." The language was dry, efficient, unemotional. The lock remained in place. A review had been initiated. Copies of submitted documents had been added to the official record. Then one line, short, precise, changed the weight of everything. "There is suspicion of document falsification. The file will be forwarded to the appropriate authority." My phone rang, I didn't answer. A knock followed shortly after. One knock, then another, firmer. I checked the door camera. My father stood outside, alone. No lawyer, no folder, no confidence. I opened the door only slightly. "We need to talk," he said immediately. "No," I replied. "We don't." His jaw tightened. "This has gone too far." "It's been stopped," I corrected. "By the system." He lowered his voice. "Do you understand what happens if this continues?" "Yes," I said calmly. "And you should have thought about that before trying to remove my name." His eyes flicked past me, into the house. "We'll withdraw the request," he said. "We'll tell them it was a misunderstanding." "You can't withdraw what's already been recorded," I replied. "They copied everything." He exhaled sharply. "Then say the document is real," he said. "Say you signed it." I looked at him, and for the first time I understood exactly what he was asking. Not compromise, not peace. Participation. "No," I said. His voice dropped. "You're destroying the family. I didn't raise mine. I'm ending the fraud." He stared at me, searching for hesitation. There wasn't any. "You'll regret this," he said finally. "Maybe," I replied. "But not as much as you'll regret trying." He stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked away. I closed the door quietly and sat back at the table, the letter from the registry still open in front of me, because I knew something else now. The next message wouldn't come from my parents. It would come from an office that doesn't negotiate. The confirmation email arrived the next morning. No greeting. No explanation. Just a reference number, a date, and a single sentence stating that the review had officially begun. Any changes to the property record are suspended until further notice. I forwarded it to my lawyer. His reply came minutes later. Received. The lock remains. Do not respond to any direct contact. By noon, my mother tried again. 3 missed calls. 2 messages. The first was angry. The second was softer. "We never meant to hurt you. This has all been blown out of proportion." I didn't reply, because I understood something now that I hadn't before. They weren't upset because the system had misunderstood them. They were upset because, for the first time, it had understood them perfectly. That afternoon, my lawyer called. "There's been a development," he said. My chest tightened. "The registry has confirmed that the documents submitted yesterday are being reviewed separately," he continued, "not just as part of the lock." "Separately how?" I asked, "as evidence?" I closed my eyes. "And my parents?" "They've been notified that further communication regarding the property must go through legal representation." There it was, the line they couldn't cross anymore. "Does this mean—" I began. "It means they can't fix this with a phone call," he said. "Or a conversation. Or guilt." I hung up and stood in the kitchen for a long moment, listening to the quiet. No raised voices, no knocking, no pressure, just stillness. That evening, another envelope arrived. This one thicker. Inside was a formal notice. The registry confirmed that the lock would remain active. The submitted documents were under verification, and any attempt to influence the process could result in further action. No threats. Just boundaries. Later, my phone buzzed again. A voice message from my mother. I listened this time. Her voice was shaking. Not angry, not commanding. Scared. "You don't understand what you've done. If this goes further..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I deleted the message. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. Because I finally understood the difference between family and access. Family can ask. Access must be earned and mine had been abused. I stepped outside into the backyard. The house stood exactly as it always had. No locks on the doors had changed. No walls had moved. But something fundamental was different. This place wasn't just emotionally mine anymore. It was institutionally protected. Weeks later, the final notice arrived. The registry informed me that the property record would remain unchanged. The lock stayed, the review continued, and the case file, once opened, would not be erased. I never received another request from my parents. No paperwork. No visits, just silence. And for the first time, that silence felt like peace. I looked at the house, not as a symbol or a victory, just as what it was. A place that belonged to me, not to tradition, not to family pressure, not to manipulation, and the word that once sounded threatening now meant safety. Locked. If you've ever had to protect something that was yours, not with anger but with documentation, you understand what I learned that day. The loudest fight isn't always the one that wins. Sometimes the quietest action is the one that cannot be undone. Stay for the next story, because sometimes the people who taught you to be afraid are the very ones who should have been.